Welcome to the third introductory segment, the place and date of composition. At the beginning of Revelation, John writes, I, John, your brother, who share with you in Jesus the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance, was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Well, we can visit the Isle of Patmos today. It is a small island, 7.5 miles long and 6 miles wide. In the Middle Ages, because of the association with St. John, it was a place that was venerated, and a monastery of St. John the Theologian was constructed by Christodoulos. There are a number of early Patmos traditions. St. Irenaeus says the book was written close to the end of the reign of Domitian, around 96 AD. Christian tradition says that Domitian sent John into exile. St. Jerome and Eusebius confirm this story, but they could be just relying on the testimony of Irenaeus. For the dating of this book, there are basically two proposals. One is that the book was written during the reign of Nero from 64 to 70 AD, during a persecution which took place at that time. The second is that it was written during Domitian's reign from 81 to 96 AD. One can actually make a case for either possibility, but the evidence tips toward Domitian, in my opinion. It's also true that the majority of scholars still support the second hypothesis, as did Irenaeus and Origen. If we examine each briefly, the Neronian persecution, Nero was widely regarded as an evil tyrant. He's basically the cartoon character of a bad guy in the ancient world. The Roman writer Pliny describes him as the destroyer of the human race, the poison of the world, the enemy of mankind. Tacitus relates that he put to death so many innocent men. It is likely under Nero that St. Peter was martyred, and possibly St. Paul, although there is another tradition that he escaped his first persecution and was martyred in Rome somewhat later. Under Nero, there certainly was a definite persecution, but it was limited to Rome. Domitian's persecution could be thought of this way. There was a general understanding, especially among Christian writers, that he was a detestable autocrat, he was an incompetent ruler, and some early Christian writers see him as a persecutor of Christians. More current scholarship, however, has pointed out that this is possibly a false picture presented by the senatorial aristocracy which Domitian was in conflict with in Rome. So writers such as Pliny, Tacitus, Suetonius all picture him as a pretty evil and incompetent person. But other writers from the same period share quite a different picture, that he was very confident, that he actually was successful in his military campaigns and managed his finances well. So that's kind of a coin toss. We're not really sure. Is there evidence of persecution? Well, there probably isn't any evidence of widespread persecution under Domitian, but there is at least evidence of local persecution, especially in Asia, and also of the beginnings of emperor worship, perhaps not imposed, but voluntarily undertaken by various Asian cities as they competed for the favor of the emperor. During this time, Roman coins were also minted, which enthroned Domitian as the father of the gods. So some evidence of the beginnings of emperor worship as well. Now, when we hear that, we may be taking that further than the ancient Romans would have taken it. They may have just seen him as the supreme mediator between man and God, and not necessarily as an actual God. But nonetheless, there were temples and cults that began where people would burn incense and worship images of the emperor during this period. So, a time of persecution. It seems to describe the book of Revelation, seems to describe persecution and emperor worship. Persecution in Asia, however, does not fit Nero, but perhaps minimal persecutions under Domitian. Emperor worship does not really begin until after the time of Domitian. Revelation seems to describe some persecutions, but if we look at each of them, of course, the author, John, is banished to Patmos in 1:9. Some believers in Smyrna are about to be thrown in prison, and John tells them, "You will have tribulation, be faithful unto death." So that definitely looks like persecution. Then in 12:11, the saints in heaven are pictured who love not their lives even unto death. So there definitely are martyrs in heaven, but so this evidence would be ambiguous. And finally, in 13:5 to 10, there is a description of the first beast, who is haughty and blasphemous and given authority, and all who dwell on the earth must worship the beast. And it says, if anyone slays with the sword he must be slain. So, to be honest, is there evidence of persecution in Revelation? Yes, but it's pretty ambiguous for answering our specific question. So once again, the majority of scholars have favored the Domitian persecution, but it is still possible to see the other as the answer to the question.